Here we are.
Hey.
It is Wednesday, March 17th.
St.
It's
Patrick's Day
St. Patrick's Day.
in the
Happy
green
St.
room.
Patrick's Day.
That's our green, I guess, is the room.
That's right.
Yeah,
Exactly. And the little thing below that
that's
says our
green too.
names. It's
Yeah,
green too. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. So, welcome to the green room. Oh my goodness, coming to you live from Saskatoon. And yeah, it was just a little flurry of activity before we came on here. Woo. We're a little bit late, but we had some technical difficulties. So, hope you guys are all doing good out there. I'm Leslie.
I'm Johnny.
And yeah, we're episode 8. So
Episode 8. Mic check. Ian, how's this level?
Oh, I hope that
is that better
good.
for you? Is that better for you now? All right. Well,
testing 1, 2.
This is what people tuned in for.
And hello to everybody that's watching afterwards. So I hope it's all sounding good. We're just testing out these new
old mics. The new one didn't work.
Okay. So
all right.
So we're okay.
Okay.
Now. We're settled.
You have to talk right into it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No looking at me.
Okay. So the Grammys, hey, we watched the Grammys on Sunday. I don't know if you guys did, but I don't know. I really enjoyed them. I thought they were really good because they were different, and you know, we didn't watch them every year. There's some years we just kind of didn't feel that kind of connected to them, but this year was awesome because they did this thing where they had the bands and the artists in the round. So they had 4 stages set up, and each of the artists played, and the other artists just listened and had fun listening to. I thought
that was cool when you'd see the shots of the other groups watching the performers.
Yeah,
that's kind of neat. It was very much like Jules Holland.
It was totally.
What's that show called? Later with Jules? Is it no? What is
Later with Jules?
Is it? I don't know, but it's a British show. Jules Holland has all those bands playing, and they're all set up in the same room like that.
Yeah, it was. It was awesome. It was just a lot of fun, and it just took our minds off of, what's going on and how not normal things feel. So it made us feel a little more normal, as well as they ended up involving venues like owners and workers from some independent venues, and that was really cool. Like they had some people from the Apollo, they had people from the Troubadour, and they presented the winners with their awards, and that was awesome because you heard some great stories from all of the people at these venues. So that was really cool. So
who was your favorite performance?
I don't know. They were all really, really good. You know who I liked actually that I was surprised at was Haim,
Chuck Fieldman,
because they just, I don't know, they rocked it out. They've got even the rock faces going, and they just are having fun. And it just was, I was surprised. So I think that was probably my favorite. But the performance by Cardi B and Megan that was so much fun. That was crazy fun. So I could only imagine if that was on TV when I was a kid. My dad would be like, "What is happening?" So, but Madonna did her thing on the stage back in the 80s, for Pete's sake. So, but no, it was so much fun. Okay, so what else are we going to talk about? Oh yeah, it's been 30 years since REM released "Losing My Religion."
30 years.
30 years.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah, I know.
Where does the time go?
I can't think about that too much. And
seems like just yesterday I was excited about that.
And now it's like 30 years. Also, the Bee Gees made their US TV debut on the Ed Sullivan Show. But I wanted to mention that because we watched the Bee Gees documentary. It's on Netflix, I think, and it was really good.
It was really good.
Yeah.
And I told my brother.
Kind of sad a little bit.
I told Jay, my brother, that hey, we watched the Bee Gees documentary, and it was actually really good. And I said I didn't realize how many hit songs they had, and my brother's like, "Well, you obviously don't have Bee Gees' greatest hits."
Anyway, that was a great documentary. There's a lot of good music shows right now on there. Okay, so we're going to just be quiet now. Well, we are not going to be completely quiet, but we are thrilled because we want to bring out our guest that we have on tonight. We're excited because we love him. He is amazing guy, talented, and
smart guy too.
Yes, he
Genius
is.
material, maybe even.
Yes, absolutely, no doubt. So just want to give you a little intro. He has an extensive background in the music industry, having produced, mixed, and engineered gold and platinum selling albums for artists like Wilco, Everclear, the Jayhawks, and Matthew Sweet. And a whole lot of Canadian bands too, which you probably don't realize have his name on them. So we have a lot to talk about with him and some personal things too. But please welcome.
You got some scores to settle.
No. Please welcome to the green room, Jim Rondinelli.
Hey, good to see you guys.
You too, bud.
I was just listening to your run up. I'm like, wow, this sounds really good. Who are they gonna? Oh, it's me.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
But I think fairness, and Saskatoon being in my favorite country, we should talk about the Canadian bands, which just from top of head, and this is the beginning. Let's see: Sloan, the Inbreds, the Rankins, Tragically Hip, Odds, Ginger, Limblifter, and most importantly, Universal Honey.
Truly, yes.
I know, my gosh.
Yeah, and so we were talking about that when we first heard Girlfriend by Matthew Sweet, the lead-off track, Divine Intervention. Like, I was a fan because I had Inside on vinyl. Yeah, so there it is there. But when you heard that first guitar come in, you're like, holy crap, this is what a guitar on a record is supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
And it's like, we got to get this guy. Can we get this guy? Can we get this guy to come mix our record? And it all worked out. You showed up with your Genelix in a box, and we were on our way.
Yeah. ProX. So the old ProX speakers that I used to carry.
Okay.
But yeah, that was fun. It was a really fun record to mix. It was, what was nice about it, that room that we worked in, Aubrey's room, was every studio has its own character, and there's some rooms that are really hard to work in and get a sense out of, and that room was actually exceptionally good. So that was great. But I mean, the best part of it is I'm really proud of the record we made, and best of all, it becomes like a lifelong friendship, because a lot of times you spend, as a producer or mixer, you'll spend days, weeks, months in the studio with somebody, and then that's it, and you never see them again after a month of being intimately familiar with every aspect of their life and going through the battle of making a record together. So I'm just glad that we've stayed in touch over the years, no matter what I might have said about you in press later.
Well, we have kept in touch. Like we even saw you as recent as three years ago when we were out in San Diego, which makes me want to ask you. So you were in San Diego, and
right.
Now you moved to Seattle. So how are you guys all settling in there? How's the family doing?
We love it. It's been 3 years here now, and that was ended up being right before we moved here. Family's great. So kids are now 12 and 14. Tony's fine. She sends her love.
But we send our love back to Tony.
Oh, definitely will. We love living up here. The only heartbreak of it is we're 3 hours from the border, and the border's closed. It's been closed for years, so that I really miss. I really miss being able to see bands. Literally, the last show I saw was at the Commodore in Vancouver. It was a 20th anniversary plus reunion of the Sharkskins. For those of you who aren't aware, the Sharkskins are a side project that are three of the members of the Odds, Craig Northey, Doug Elliott, and Pat Stewart, and then Simon Kendall from Doug and the Slugs on organ. And they actually coincidentally also happened to have played at our wedding.
Wow.
That
Oh
was
my
a real
gosh.
honor.
Oh
Yeah,
my
we had
gosh.
a smoking wedding band.
Wow,
No
Yeah,
kidding.
that's awesome.
Wow. So
So, okay, wait.
you go
Let me go
first.
first. Well, let's get back to the beginning of the Jim Rondinelli story. It was a stormy night, and you were born in Iowa.
I was not born in Iowa. I was actually
Oh,
born in New York.
oh, you were, but you
So,
lived in Iowa.
yeah, I was born in New York, lived in Iowa. Grew up in Iowa. When I was 2, my dad took a job running sales for a meatpacking company in Dubuque, Iowa. And this is kind of the classic family story, because when he takes the job, he storms in the door like, "Guess what, honey?" And this is like, picture my mom, my 5'2" mom, stirring this pot of sauce over the stove, and my dad bursts in, "Guess what, honey? I've been offered the job as head of sales for the Dubuque Packing Company in Dubuque, Iowa." And my mother, just not missing a beat, stirring the sauce, looks up and says, "What did you tell them?" Because, for her whole
Yeah.
family and her whole life was within a few miles of her, and her sister was in New York City, and God knows I spent a lot of time with her sister as a kid. But it was a big move. We uprooted the family. We moved to Iowa. I was 2, so I didn't really know upstate New York that much. It ended up being a pretty lucky thing. Hello, Jared.
Hello,
Nice.
Jared.
Hey, Jared.
So thanks for joining us. So anyway, yeah, did that, and then it was funny because this ties straight to music, the New York City part. We would go, my brother and I would be dispatched in the name of culture, which really meant to get out of my mother's hair. We'd be dispatched to her sister, my Aunt Ginny, who lived at the border of New York City and Long Island on the New York City side. But literally like the last block of New York City on 250th Street, a neighborhood, Rosedale, that was later made famous by Run DMC, because that's where those guys came from. So anyway, Rosedale represent. So in 2 blocks away was a shopping mall, and there was a Sam Goody, which in those days was not just a record store, but they actually sold a lot of musical instruments as well. And my enterprising brother realized that he could buy musical instruments there, sell them in Iowa where they weren't discounted. And that became the beginning of his store, Rondinelli Music in Dubuque, Iowa, that's now existed for 45 years.
Wow.
Yeah, really crazy. And he's still at it, slugging away. It's been his only job his whole life. In contrast to me. He went out his whole life. But anyway, and then my background in this really came from kind of hanging at the store, watching this, and also being the person who, whenever we'd get some new tech in, would be the first person to go and read the manual. So read the manual, learn to use the gear, started to do recording when I was a teenager. And then it goes to the University of Iowa, where I went to school. As it ends up, the University of Iowa had this tremendous microphone and recording expert who's also known for his work with new music and, of all things, laser displays. A professor called Lowell Cross. And Lowell talked the University of Iowa into buying a Neve console and a Studer multitrack for the university's recording studio. But Lowell was also kind of restrictive in what he liked recording on his gear, which of course just made me all the much happier to sneak bands in at night in the middle of the darkness into the university's recital hall. And that's where I started to cut my teeth recording. Wow. Phase 2 was coming out of university. I ended up getting jobs marketing recording studio equipment, but really only to get a path to the studio, and used it as a way to meet a lot of the people who I looked up to for their work. And what's funny is they were all very encouraging. They generally had gone through the studio apprentice path, which didn't fit my personality at all. The whole thing of, like start sweeping floors, bring in the tea, somebody likes you, they let you clean up after the studio. One day the engineer doesn't show up and you end up running the session, and then the artist keeps you, like that path. And that story was really kind of common. Mine was a little different. I started using the proceeds from those marketing gigs to go out and record bands at nights and on weekends with studios that I had established relationships with for my day bands or for my day gig. So some of those bands were like that was Sold American, and we got the band signed to Rough Trade in 1987. Made a great record that's really hard to find and isn't yet on streaming services, although I really hope it's going to be on streaming services soon. Sold American were a very interesting hybrid of country and reggae that hasn't really been touched on since. So Sold American ended up that the Jayhawks guys were big fans of Sold American, as is Jeff Tweedy from Wilco. Jeff's a huge fan.
Wow.
So because those guys were just so kind of iconic and ahead of their time. So made the Sold American record. The band introduced me to the Jayhawks at a South by Southwest. Ended up making a whole bunch of other records for Rough Trade, the indie label, when they had a U.S. operation. That led to making records with Chris Stamey for A&M, and about the same time, Rick Menck, who's been Matthew Sweet's live drummer for 35 years or something like that now. The amazing Rick Menck introduced me to Matthew. Matthew and I hit it off. Did our first recordings in 1988, pre-Girlfriend, on the heels of his album Earth, which he made for A&M. But I had a pretty different vision of how Matthew should sound, and fortunately, it was really consistent with how Matthew was thinking, and we ended up making the record that became Girlfriend for A&M. Funny thing about that is that A&M actually dropped the record, and they were really. It was partially because the A&R person had left to go to another label. But it was also because, and this was to the great benefit of that team of executives at A&M, they're like, look, we hear the record. We think it's really good. We have no idea how to sell it. So why don't you guys go find a new home for it? Find somebody who thinks that they can market this thing. We won't take an override, which, by the way, was unheard of. So basically, like, just pay us back. You don't have to pay us any piece of this. Find a new home for your record. Good luck. So now it takes about a year for us to find a home for Girlfriend. All of us, Matthew, his longtime manager, Russell Carter, and then two key advocates, a woman called Karen Glauber, who has forever been the editor of Hits Magazine, and a guy called Michael Crumper, who's an incredible presence in this industry, manager, marketer, publicist, and all things related to getting product on the street. That everybody sort of took an assault squad tactic to getting the record on the street. A guy called Scott Byron who used to be the editor of the College Music Journal, got hired to do A&R at a new BMG label called Zoo. He brought it to his boss, Bud Scappa, and it almost didn't get signed. Again, we had a deal then, and then all of a sudden the deal went dark, and this is where Bud Scappa gets the save. Bud looks for his boss, the late Lou Malia. Lou used to walk through the aisles every morning of Zoo Records. He waited till Lou was coming over. He beat Lou in that morning. He started playing the single Girlfriend right as Lou was walking around, and Lou leans in the office and says, "What's this?" And they're like, "Bud, it's Matthew Sweet. Is it signed?" "No, it's not signed." "Well, why don't you sign it?" "Well, we're trying to sign it and it's stuck in finance." "Oh, I'll fix that." And the next thing you know, Girlfriend came out, and we got the record signed. 2 weeks before we dropped the record, Nirvana released Nevermind, and Nevermind put such a change in commercial radio. So it's the number one runaway record in the country, and you have this whole infrastructure of top 10, top 100 radio stations that wouldn't play it because it was too loud and too different. And finally, when it became number one, like, we're the top 10 station, you have to play the number one record. And I have to think in a little way that helped open the door for the loud guitars on Girlfriend, and that's how we ended up with a radio hit.
Well, that's cool.
Wow.
What a
I
story.
love that
Yeah.
story so much for so many different reasons, but just that you believed in that album and it took, you said, a year.
A
So,
year from the time we finished it till like a year and 2 months from the time we finished until it came out on the street.
yeah, like that's amazing
Yeah.
that everybody just knew it, just believed in it and didn't give up and just knew there was something there. And so many times, artists will do an album and it's like, oh, okay, it's not catching on. Oh, well, on to the next one, rather than really, believing in something and knowing that no, there's something here and
Yeah.
people need to
Right.
hear it.
And sometimes you can make a great record that just ends up being a little bit ahead of when the market's willing to listen to it as well. I mean, how many great albums do we know that weren't initially commercial successes, and then all of a sudden people kind of get hip to them and they're like, "Oh my God, this thing is perfect."
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, I know that I was a fan before that record came out. I don't know how I came across Matthew Sweet, but big pop music fan. And when that opening track, Divine Intervention, first came on, it was like, wow. So
Yeah.
I got to tell you a funny story. So while we're making that record, I mean, I felt the same way, and I knew it was like the best thing I'd ever done to date that so far. And of course, that was years before we met, but I knew it was like the best thing I'd done so far to date. But and I would literally pop out of my chair. Like there are some times when we're doing guitar solos, and Quine or Richard Lloyd would play something that was so ridiculously amazing, but that we recorded the rhythm guitar on that song the first or second day that we were in the studio, and I knew the minute that we did the rhythm guitar and Divine Intervention that, oh my God, this was going to be different. I just knew that it was a very different record right away.
Yeah.
So how did you, is that sound, is that something that you developed through time, and or is it like how did that happen, the guitar sound?
Awesome guitar player.
Awesome guitar player, amp straight chord into amp turned up to 11. But so that's a big key of it, but there's a prototype for it. There's a record that I made with a band called the Dang Trippers called Days Between Stations. That's on streaming services now. And if you listen to a song called Headhunter was sort of the prototype. And I knew I was going to make the record with Matthew. The guitars on that Dang Trippers record are sort of the prototype were the chance for me to work out what became the framing of Matthew's record. So what I wanted to do with Matthew's record, and Matthew's record was really a collaboration between Matthew, Matthew and Fred Marr co-produced the record. Fred had a lot of great input. But what I wanted to do from the standpoint of recording and mixing the record was sort of to do the exact opposite of what he'd done with Earth. I wanted to make a record that, rather than burying Matthew in a flurry of digital effects, I wanted no effects. I wanted to put Matthew's vocal loud and up front, because Matthew sings his songs perfectly, but he doesn't have like a particularly finished voice. He has a great voice that's perfect for his songs.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought we should build, rather than putting a bunch of digital effects on it and chorus guitars and synth pads, that we ought to make a record that was as scrappy as Matthew's songs and raw as Matthew's songs were. I mean, that record, when you dig into the music and lyrics of that record, Matthew had just gone through a really heart-wrecking divorce, had just fallen in love with a woman he's still married to today, who's like his soulmate, and which is another beautiful story that came out of that time. Yeah. But that record is really a chronicle of the stuff that he was going through. So loud, raucous guitars. And very early on, Matthew, Fred, and I had set some rules on the record that we adhered to through the whole thing, which were no digital effects, loud, raucous guitars, no reverb at all. There's no reverb anywhere on the record. And lots of compression to make everything sound and feel loud. And that was sort of the template to it. And,
Was that something that he was on board? Like, sometimes producers and artists have, sometimes they don't see eye to eye. Is that something that just you guys were like, he saw your vision? He was like, yeah, let's do it.
It's a mix of both. So one of the beautiful things about Matthew is that he did really elaborate demos and knew what he wanted to do in those days, before he went into the studio. So in those days, the idea of doing a demo and do a recording and then going into the studio to actually record it for real were two different stages. In contrast, when we record now, because of the democratic access that we all have to technology, gear's cheaper. My Mac comes with free software that can do way more than I could ever do in the studio in those days, in terms of moving stuff around or retuning it or flying it or cutting it up and editing it. Now home recording is so prevalent. I mean, for the last 2 years, the Grammy winners for best engineered records were recorded at home. So through that, now that's sort of blurred the process. But in those days, Matthew had an 8-track half-inch recorder, that the Tascam machine, that he would record all of his demos on and lay out all the arrangements. And often he would go home after we record the tracks. He'd go home on the weekend, do all these elaborate vocal arrangements, come back in, test them on Fred and I, and then we'd just go and capture them. So in that point, I was really just capturing whatever Matthew's vision and arrangement was for his vocals. And in terms of, did we have a different view? I think we all kind of came from the same place, but I kind of talked. I had a pretty loud and firm opinion of what it should be going into it.
Yeah, well, I think that may be one of the things that is so refreshing about that recording, is it came at the end of the 80s, which was, at that point, you're getting into extremely, a lot of digital sound, and that the sound of the guitars and everything sounded just so real. So that was a huge part of the appeal, other than the songs being awesome as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're huge Velvet Crush fans as well.
Oh my God.
Rick
Mank. Oh my God.
Rick is he is the greatest human, and he is an encyclopedia of music. That guy has forgotten more bands and more songs than I will ever know in my life.
Right. Oh my God.
Yeah, we saw him in Toronto.
When we saw him in Toronto with which band did we see him with? But that he would keep walking out from behind the drums and come to this mic and just start talking and saying
that's
Rick. It was hilarious.
Rick doing a Velvet Crush gig. That is totally
exactly.
Velvet Crush.
Yeah,
for sure.
That was awesome.
Sure. Okay, so then I guess your first Canadian record is The Odds. Is that?
Yeah. So this is kind of a funny thing. So The Odds were also signed to Zoo, the record that put out Girlfriend. And as happens, when you have a hit record somewhere, and that label wants you to work with more of their artists. But from the first time I saw The Odds, it was like, oh my God, there's this bit of genius there. Amazing players, well honed from really struggling it out as a cover band for years and years to make their way to Los Angeles. Two really strong songwriters. And I will admit, it was a hard record to make for a bunch of interpersonal reasons. But I love that record and still listen to it to this day. And I'm still proud to be in touch with those guys. And like I say, literally the last gig I went to before COVID lockdown was, with those guys. So that made The Odds record. The Odds record led to exposure to other Canadian bands. 3 years later, it's Sloan, Twice Removed. I think I made Twice Removed and Ginger's Far Out record in the same year, which I think was 94. So yeah, that was 3 years. Sloan's Twice Removed record came originally as a lead from my manager. But before, well, the business side of it came as a lead from my manager. The introduction didn't. The introduction came from Alan Mcgee. So Alan Mcgee, the founder of Creation Records, who they're actually making a feature motion picture about starring Alan Mcgee, which is going to be hysterical. Alan Mcgee called me. We had been acquaintances in New York in the early 90s, and he called one day and he said, hey, what are you doing? I'm in the studio. And he said, get the fuck out of the studio. Meet me at Limelight. There's this band, and I'm convinced you guys should make a record together. And that was my introduction to Sloan.
Wow.
Wow.
That's another great record. I mean,
Yeah. No kidding.
all these albums are awesome.
I know. Hey, should we ask a question?
well,
Here, someone has a question.
We have a question.
Sure.
We're just going to take a
Go ahead
break.
with questions.
Jared has a question here that says, any advice to an emerging artist?
Oh, Jared, that's a great question. So one is never let anybody tell you can't do it. I mean, think about this. Here's Johnny and Leslie. Here am I. We all come from different backgrounds, but they all kind of come from the same. None of us came from families that were in the entertainment business per se. None of us are from Hollywood celebrity royalty families, although that makes things easier. None of us had a nephew or an uncle that worked in the business that would cover our backs. Everybody comes from somewhere. And one of the things I learned when I was making records is that everybody, and especially today, everybody has a different path to it. So in general, two things. One, never let anybody tell you can't do it. Second, be realistic. And what I mean by that is find the people who resonate with your music and don't care so much about the people who don't. Don't try to make music to resonate with people. Make music that resonates with you. And I swear, if you stay with that and keep working at it, you will find a group of people who love what you do. And as long as you maintain a communication relationship with those people, and these days we do it via social media, you can find yourself getting a lot of joy and satisfaction out of this business. Yes, it's a very different business than it was in the days of physical product, but an interesting statistic we were talking about on a call yesterday. I was on a call yesterday where a guy called Ralph Simon, who is a really brilliant technology executive who happens to also have founded Zamba Music Publishing, was on with a guy called a Canadian, I might add, called Mcgee. I screw up his last name every time, but the founder of Hypnosis Songs, who have made an incredible financial business out of some of the world's best songs. And one of the things that they pointed out in their call was the music business this year will probably be bigger than it was at its high watermark in 2001, which is something that nobody ever thought would happen again. Mm-hmm. So there's still tons and tons of money in music. There's still tons and tons of opportunity, but it's in different places now. And you have to find it in different ways than the old route of make a record, tour, sign to a record company. Yeah. Now it's do it yourself, establish a relationship with your fans, communicate with them often. You can't be, hidden and have a reclusive life away from your audience. You have to engage with them as often as you can. I think Johnny and Leslie, you guys have done a great job with your band of putting the stuff back out, exposing the music to people again, giving people another chance at it, and keeping a communication dialogue happening with the people who love your music.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I might also add, and just to embarrass you, but I think that last record you made, the EP, probably has the best songs you guys have written of your career.
Wow.
And that's a record I suggest that everybody, and I'm serious when I say this, I think that's a record that everybody should be listening to and checking out. Do you have a cover of that you can flash up? Because you should.
No, well, we're just too modest.
UH 2020.
UH2020. It's available on all streaming platforms, so you can go check it out under Universal Honey.
Back before midnight
But
tonight.
there are. I want to talk to you about the Tragically Hip, and we want to talk about more or less what you've been just sort of hinting on right now about the old business model versus the new business model and technology, where it's going. We heard something recently about a thing called NFT. But first of all, Jim, we have a sponsor.
We have a
so we got to
sponsor,
read a
so
little
we're gonna-
ad here, and then we're going to come right back to you. Okay?
We'll be right back after this.
Yeah, right back after this.
That's right. We have a sponsor, and it is Field Fox Gardens and Cookery. They're a preparation and delivery service in Saskatoon. They're 100% gluten-free and organic and only use quality ingredients found close home. Field Fox has just launched the pre-selling of lasagna in your choice of 2 sizes. They are proud to partner with Farm 140 to provide grass-fed beef in this carefully prepared classic meal that is delivered frozen for your convenience. In the coming days and weeks, the menu will grow to include fresh salads, condiments, spice blends, and more frozen prepared meals to suit every lifestyle. Their products are soon to be featured at Sask Made Marketplace, which only sells the best local goods. So please visit fieldfox.ca to order your lasagna and sign up for the newsletter to be notified as the menu expands.
Yes, you sign up for that email because that's how their business survives and thrives. A little side
Now,
fact
okay,
here
great.
is that
Now I'm hungry.
I saw an article that
good
said
food.
Saskatoon leads Canada in businesses in Saskatoon. 85% of them now sell online. The national average is 61%.
Oh, okay.
And
Wow.
and another thing that's interesting
Good.
about Saskatoon is only 11% of the people here use cash.
Yeah, I know that's
Pretty.
That's good.
Yes.
So, interesting statistic from business travel. Sweden is about a 98% cashless society as well. And that's gonna
Oh, wow.
come up, and it sort of ties back to the transition we were talking about where the world and the industry has changed, but we can get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you end up hello, Bill Douglas.
Hey, Bill.
He's right Quad Cities, right? So that's close to where you grew up, Jim, right?
As a matter of
Bettendorf,
fact, the Quad Cities were that's good. Rock Island and Moline.
Yeah.
About an hour south of my family's music store, Rondinelli Music in Dubuque.
Right.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Okay, so you talked about all the Canadian records, Dan Brick and Kim Stockwood as well, right? And,
yep, Dan and Kim, it's both of whom I love. Dan just released our record. Our record Lover's Leap finally came out on streaming services. Unfortunately, Adam Schlesinger. So Dan made the record. Originally, the record started as a production with the CBC somehow, and ultimately the masters ended up in the hand of Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne, who is a huge fan of Dan's. Adam loved Dan's music and loved the raw sort of naivety and innocence that Dan brought to his singing and songwriting. He just loved everything about him. Adam, unfortunately, we lost a year ago this month to COVID. I thought for sure he was going to be the first of my friends to win the EGOT, the like Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony, which he sure as hell seemed on his way to do. But anyway, so yeah, I made Lover's Leap with Dan. It was one of the last records I made before I pivoted to tech, and I just mixed it. Dan had done a beautiful job recording and laying out all the arrangements, and it's a record I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of the work with Kim, which came from a very different path. And she's her career in music and media and her personality was larger than life from day one. I mean, here's this young woman from Newfoundland, and damn you if you get in her way. There's just no two ways about it. I was introduced to her originally by the great A&R guy Tim Trombley from EMI Records and Dean Cameron, another Canadian music icon who left us too soon. Fortunately, Tim is not here. He has not left us. He may want to leave us after I talk about him a little more, but we'll get into stories about Tim later. But Tim made the introduction. Kim was a young artist. I put her together with a band of real crack LA session players, and it was a really fun record to make because of that. So with the exception of a few sessions that were done in Canada, the core band on that record is the great Greg Leese, who has played with everybody from Matthew Sweet. He was the guitar player, one of the guitar players on Girlfriend, to he's played with Ray LaMontagne for years. And usually when you see the Grammy backing band or the Oscars backing band, here's Greg playing guitar and steel. So it's Greg Leese, Bob Glaub. Bob Glaub has played with everybody. He's sort of like the purest bass player in LA. And then another tremendous musician who happens to be a hell of a great songwriter and singer as well, called Don Heffington. So Heffington, Greg Leese, and Bob Glaub were the core band. And then Craig Northey played on that record as well. We just had a really great Jerry Dale McFadden from the Mavericks played on that record as well. He really made some tremendous contributions. So anyway, it was a really fun record to make. We made it at the Captain and Tennille's studio Rumbo in Los Angeles, and about the third day we were there, we had to evacuate our hotel because of mudslides and wildfires. It was like the quintessential California experience of making a record.
Wow.
But it was fun. And, look at the stuff that Kim did. Now, interestingly enough, and props to Kim, we finished the record. I went on to do other stuff, and Tim and Kim they released the record, and then they thought, Kim's got this idea, and that idea was Jerk, which became the single. They stripped it into the album. Michael Philip help me with his last name.
Voivoda. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and sorry about that. And he did a great job.
We had Dave Bedini on, and he just calls him Michael Phillip. He doesn't even say his last name.
So Michael Phillip produced that record, that single, which really gave the record commercial legs that it didn't have by the time I was done with it, because we had started on a different path, and that record really gave Kim the shot in the arm she needed to have the career that she's had today. I wish I was in better touch with her and her husband, Alan, but again, COVID, what can you do?
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, we were talking about the business model. Now, that's when you said you pivoted. So Sean Fanning invents Napster, and there's a P2P, a person-to-person sharing, and the music business basically craps its pants. And, it's like the end of the world. Is this part of the reason why you sort of shifted from making records to working with digital strategies? I know you worked for Warner Chappell and RDO.
So it was part of it, and the first one of all those companies was MP3. But it kind of, the history goes like this: in about 1996 and 97, I started doing sessions with some of the same musicians who played on Kim's record, where I'd be in the studio in New York, and then we'd use a satellite line to record them wherever they were in Los Angeles, because it didn't make sense for me to go back and forth. And I only needed an overdub or two, so I could conduct a session over satellite. They could record. They were great musicians. We could get what we needed quickly and, just do everything that way. And then shortly thereafter, I got a pretty fast internet connection in my house, and I just had this moment that kind of clicked, like, wait a second, if I can do this, sooner or later people are going to start sending music over these things, because I'm already sending stereo masters over the internet now. I'm streaming them, but sooner or later somebody's going to figure out a way to do it. that was when companies like Real Audio and Microsoft Windows Audio Player were just starting to come out, and as MP3, the format was just starting to take place. And I figured this thing's going to be, it's going to change music, and if I don't get in front of it now, it's going to be really hard to be, on top of the industry and in front of the industry at the point that everybody's trying to chase it. Mm-hmm. So I talked to a friend of mine who ended up was an early stage investor in a lot of these companies, my pal Ted, and he had invested in 4 similar companies, and I had the choice of working at 2 of them. And went to work for one called mp3.com. mp3.com was sort of the precursor to MySpace and YouTube, the first post your own user generated content company. And all of a sudden overnight, we went from having 40 employees to having 250 employees and 20 million users every month. Wow. And that was an explosive thing, but the industry, for good reasons, the industry wasn't ready to embrace what was happening with MP3. In fact, they saw MP3 and Napster, which ironically wanted to partner with MP3, and we passed on because our first thought was, "Are you kidding me? That's illegal as hell." But you know what? Sean was right. What Sean figured out is that using the internet, people were much more efficient distributors of music than distribution companies. And it was like a classic case of disruptive technology in media. A technology and a transmission mechanism came that allowed software to strip out a whole layer of inefficiency in the business. And now, 22 years downstream from that, the industry has changed. 70% of the recorded music revenue now comes from streaming files, because consumers would much rather pay $10 a month for a streaming service subscription than $18 for a CD that only had one song on it that they liked. So part of it was the industry's own doing. Part of it, we got there slower than it could have because there was a lot of resistance from the established music players until there wasn't. So, as we got through the 2000s, the people who controlled major music companies, in large part back to Canada again, thanks to Edgar Bronfman Jr., who was really the first major label head to deeply embrace recorded music, and then taken a step farther by Lucian Grange at Universal. Edgar saw that digital could open new markets and new marketplaces. Now, today, in contrast, on this call, I mentioned that we just heard that it looks like the industry is going to be bigger than its previous high watermark, thanks to streaming now. So in some ways, the industry is back, not adjusted for inflation, but it's still directionally moving in the right place. Here's the more interesting thing. If you had a platinum record in the United States, you were selling 1 million copies of that record in a country of 300 million people. So what, 1/3% of the country buys your record, it becomes platinum. Now we have 300 some odd million people here, but we have 100 million paid streaming subscriptions in the United States. That is a huge shift, and that wouldn't have been possible without the transition away from a physical media model and towards the streaming models that we have now. Not to say that the rules are set up right yet. It's still very much a business in process. There are people who are far more articulate than me on this, but there are a couple of fundamental constructs in the industry that have been distorted. When the original deals were set up between the major labels and the streaming services, the first thing the major labels did was say, okay, if you want access to our catalog, you'll have to take it on these really kind of obnoxious commercial terms. And when I say obnoxious, they were really, really good for the labels, not so good for the artists. And it took labels a long time to straighten that out. And it's better than it was 5 or 10 years ago, but it's still not right. And the other thing is that if you look at the value that songwriters are getting from the streaming services, A lot more people are making very eloquent arguments about this, but that isn't quite the balance between recorded music and the underlying composition isn't right yet. I do believe that's going to change, but that's where it sits today.
Yeah.
Right.
There's there's questions I have about this. Might be not a good question, but it came to my mind of a young artist or, an emerging artist or someone coming out, and they've created something back in the old days, the olden days, 70s, 80s. They would print something, they would go out, they would play shows, they'd have something to sell. So they would have, that transaction. People would pay money for their album or their single or whatever. And I don't know how much money you'd be able to make, but if you could keep kind of growing and growing your fan base and selling a product, your music, then you were able to make a little bit of money maybe on your John's looking at me like, where are you going with this? But make a little bit of money on the physical sales. But I think now with artists, when they're going out there and they're playing and they're basically giving out their cards saying, well, stream it, stream it, stream it, stream it. I don't know if they're seeing any money from people listening to their music, though.
Well, we talked about
like at that level, right?
Smaller artists. I don't know if these numbers are correct, Jim, but it said 90% of all streaming goes to the top 1% of artists.
I wouldn't be surprised. I think there's a 90-10 rule in place, and for full disclosure here, for a number of years I ran licensing at music services, including at Rdio, which was acquired by Sirius XM, Pandora then, Sirius XM now, back in 2015. And in those days, there was very much our 90-10 rule, where less than 10% of the catalog was generating 90% of the play activity. But that shifted over time. So the number I heard yesterday on this same call I was on was more like 65-35. And that represents a pretty interesting shift to me, because one of the things that has happened, if you think about this, in the old days of physical product, you had major labels and distributors who controlled all aspects of marketing a release. They controlled whether it got into stores, whether it got on the radio, whether you got on TV. All of that was controlled by 4 and then 3 companies. So it was super consolidated. Now, any of us can go and set up an account on a great service like DistroKid, and they will deliver our music to every streaming service on the planet. So that's a start. We can get ourselves on the shelves in the stores.
Yeah.
If you want to tie it back to the physical business, in those days when you were selling, going into, A&A or Sam's, my 2 favorite places to go in the world. I used to love to go shopping for records in TO. If you'd go into those stores, there would be end caps where merchandise was placed more prominently, or a record would be more prominently. And those were again controlled by the majors. The equivalent of that in today's world is the playlist, but the playlists aren't so controlled by the majors. And music tends to find a better way. So things are sort of leveling out, and we're seeing the distribution of the traditional, the distribution of content between majors and indies shift a little more every year. To more independent operators. We had #1 records with Macklemore on streaming services that didn't belong to a major, right? That happened a few years ago.
Yeah.
So you just kind of see things shift. And to me, that doesn't mean that the majors are dead. There are tremendous catalog assets that those guys have and control and will continue to control. We also see companies that are in the business of song management and recording management, like Hypnosis or like Primary Wave, who are another very interesting company. Primary Wave just acquired the Sun Records catalog, and they take a very, very different approach to how they get it out there. We see the world changing a lot. So the old days of doing gigs, hoping somebody signs you, they sign you, then the major label helps make you a star. Well, they're kind of still there, but for the most part, majors are buying completely finished recordings now, which allows them to de-risk their investment in the music. And it's a little easier to hear a hit when it's actually played for you than it is to hear a demo and think, oh my God, that song's going to be a hit. I mean, there were people who could do that who were super talented and who could identify talent in songs like that early. Back to, in Canadian speak, the Dean Camerons or the Michael McCartys of the world who had a real ear for that. And I don't want to speak about Michael in post tense, so I'll be careful. Michael, thank God, is still with us. He's actually out there acquiring Canadian music rights himself. But that's a different skill than somebody playing you, Megan Thee Stallion's record and you hearing it and saying, okay, I get it. I can predict that that's going to be a hit.
Yeah.
So that's what that business is like now. The other business that's different is the way we create music. So there are interesting companies out there like Splice, where people sign up for a subscription service and could go and take down all the loops and beats that they want, and they use them to create their own tracks. And then those tracks are then taken out and shopped to other people for other artists to use. I mean, it's just a very interesting thing. In the old days, in the 60s or 70s, for the most part, there'd be one, maybe two songwriters on every song. If you look at a Beyonce song, there are 10 or 13 on every song.
Yeah.
It's just, the old line we used to say in the recording studio when doing hip hop records was write a line, take a dime.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, we know
the industry continues to evolve, and it's just kind of, and the thing we have to be careful of is that the industry continues to evolve with technology and with changes in music. And as people who've been around it for a while, we either are faced with the choice that we have to adapt to the latest rules, or we start to sound like, and get off my lawn, those damn kids and their rock and roll, right? I mean,
yeah.
And that's interesting that you mentioned the Grammys earlier, because one of the big topics in my musician community over the last week or two has been, and I think they did a great job making the Grammys different. But this year, I think they did a great job, not only because it's COVID, but I mean, the Grammys were a lot more about music performances this year than they've been in years past. And thank God we didn't have any of those really shitty duets that they used to do. Those used to drive me crazy. It's like, let's take two artists who have nothing to do with each other, throw them on the stage together and have them butcher each other's songs. Thanks for that. I'd rather be burned alive. So this year was a lot more about performers and respect and diversity and inclusion, and that was all good, and I think a big change. But at the same point in time, I had a lot of people in my music community who were like, I'm done with the Grammys, that's it, and get off my lawn, because those kids and their hip-hop and the rap music. And, we gotta continue to evolve and adapt. The other thing that I just feel compelled to throw in there, and sorry you can't shut me up on this one so easily, but there's, in a lot of ways, there's more great music now than ever. It's just harder to find. And that's the challenge of this whole streaming world, is great music out there. How do you find it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you don't have a record company buying rack space.
And plus you've said stuff like, I didn't know they had an album out. I can't even an artist the other day, you were like, I love that artist. I didn't even know they had a new album out.
I'm a big fan of The Church, and there's a side project called Kilby Kennedy, and they just just have a new album out. And I was like, I just saw it, and I was like, I didn't even know this came out. Like, you don't know anymore,
so that's
right?
not
It
good.
just seems to be like,
Yeah.
You really got to take the responsibility of searching out your artists. And I guess that's why they have. I guess that's why they have the follow button, so you can follow them and get the news. But
right.
That's a new thing. But Johnny, this is interesting because and you are one of the deepest catalog music people I know. Like in my whole career, there's a small handful of people that are like you, Steve Kane at Warner in Toronto, Steve Thompson, the great producer of Thompson and Barbiero fame in New York, who worked with everybody from Blues Traveler. You know, George Derkulius, who I worked with in the Jayhawks, who has an amazing encyclopedic knowledge. You're in their category for like having a super encyclopedic knowledge. Oh, Rick Bank also. Super encyclopedic knowledge of music and a real interest in keeping on top of it. And if it's hard for enthusiasts like you guys, imagine how it is for, you know, people who are just out there with kids in a job who still love music, but just, you know, we're just trying to make things work, right? How do you find stuff?
Yeah, because it takes time to do
yeah.
the research and
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, you know, I heard a couple years ago that after all the panic and all the worry and all the 360 degree deals that labels and management were trying to do because of the fear of the business collapsing and everybody had to make money, that record companies are more profitable than they've ever been. Is that because there's no physical product delivery, storage, manufacturing, or is it?
Yes, that has part to do with it. And also part to do it is they got a lot of their own waste out of the business. I mean, you know, a company like Warner, when I was there, was a 400 or 500 person company, and years before it had been a 6,000 person company. So part of that was digital distribution. It allows you to do that. Part of that is they're just more selective on where they're hiring. They're hiring different types of people and looking at the gigs differently. And where possible, using software to reduce the size of their business. Case in couple of cases in point. Back to the physical business, and it's a funny conversation I actually was having in Toronto the last time I went to the Junos with an old music pal of mine called Sammy Valkonen. And Sammy now works for a publishing rights collective in the UK. But he reminded me that in Zoo Records days, we had these promotional categories that we would put on to get that end cap space. So one of them would be like free financing, buy 100,000 of these records. We'll carry them. We're not going to bill you for them until you sell them. Oh, and we'll give you free shipping. So that meant we had to go out and manufacture the things, ship them to the stores, and not get paid until after they sold. And then on some of them, we're like, and we'll give you a 10% credit on your account if you buy 10,000 albums. So there's another chunk of margin that comes out the top. And we'll give you free shipping on returns if the record doesn't sell. And all of a sudden you could see all this enormous cost and inefficiency in the business that gets stripped out when you can throw something on a server and have everybody access it. Now, what we screwed up as an industry is we focused on portability, and the early streaming companies adopted music compression schemes that really screwed up the sound of music. And now we have this whole generation of people who don't know what good music sounds like. And, you know, no wonder the people who are really enthusiastic about music are buying vinyl now, which, by the way, outsold CDs for the first time in since 1987.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
That's another.
Well, our son, he buys a ton of vinyl. Yeah, he loves music, and he just buys a ton of vinyl. Johnny's buying vinyl.
He's got the turntable set up over there. So yeah,
he is your son.
It's true.
Yeah, that's true. And by the way, he's into FL Studios right now and Splice, like you mentioned, and he's into beats and building beats, and he spends a lot of time in his room with his headphones on, and super excited and all. It's just so much fun to see him come out of his room with his eyes like,
So we have to get him on the call with you for sure, because he'll just listen.
Yeah. He was so quiet and polite the last time I saw him. I hope that's changed.
No, he's still pretty quiet.
Quiet.
Now your career has spanned the whole transition from 2-inch tape, Neve consoles to Pro Tools, and now to, like you say, everyone being able to the whole recording platform has been liberalized where anyone can record something. And it only makes sense to hear Jim talk about how the industry can cherry pick what they think is a hit. It makes a difference from going to sending an A&R person to a club and going, they were great, let's make a record. Go in the studio, make a record
live.
they're great
Right?
live, and then you make the record and it's like, it didn't connect, it didn't resonate, and then but now they just get to sit there and go, well, this is good, let's do this one.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly, right?
It's like,
They've tried to look. I mean, if you use finance terms, they've tried to de-risk the business as much as possible because now they're also all one way or another. They're all, Sony is publicly traded, Warner is publicly traded as a standalone music company. Universal is going to IPO this year. They have to find ways to de-risk their business and generate money for the people who own and invest in their companies.
That's so sad though, because if they're making good money, like they gotta take the risks because the people rely on them to take risks.
Well, you can see the way it goes. It's like, back in the day, you'd hear stories like, if it weren't for Columbia Records, Bruce Springsteen, and their commitment to him making 2-3 albums before he got a foothold, he wouldn't exist if it wasn't for his era. And now it's like, well, let us see what songs you want to put out, and maybe we can do that for you. It's a big huge change in the way that the whole music is presented to everybody,
for sure.
And now, Jim, with that being said, we want to talk about this NFT business. Do you know anything about this?
I do know about it. In fact, my pal Joe Conyers, who is the founder of Song Trust, a really great mechanical licensing collective, just left and announced yesterday that he was going to go run an NFT business for crypto.com. And that wasn't a huge surprise because Joe's been interested in cryptocurrency for a long time. But it was at the same point in time a real acknowledgement that there's something very real here and that we're at the very early stages of it. So for those of you who aren't familiar with NFT, it means non-fungible token. And that is kind of goes back to cryptocurrency speak. So we should probably start with a discussion of what's cryptocurrency and what's a Bitcoin, or what are and there are literally like 5,800 cryptocurrencies out there. Cryptocurrency basically operates on the idea of a general ledger, which means you give a whole bunch of people a record of every transaction that happened, and it becomes harder to unwind, or it can be done, but it becomes harder to take that digital value away from somebody because records of it are stored all over the world and all over the internet. Mm-hmm. Taking that approach, an NFT is, if you will, a token to buy that's associated with some piece of art, which may be a piece of digital art itself, or it may be the rights to a piece of art, or it may be the rights to a statement that are associated with some ownership certificate that is, in essence, traded using cryptocurrency networks. And it's a classic supply demand thing. If somebody has if somebody has a rare piece of art and they can associate and embed this digital identifier in it, there is a way to track and prove its real ownership. And if you do that, you can offer this digital non-fungible token or token for services in a way that can generate some money for the people doing it. It comes back to the idea of think about it this way. Think about it as a digital version of a limited release EP for those of us who grew up with records. There are only 1,000 copies of this Beatles record. Mm-hmm. So what's each of those copies going to be to somebody who can afford to buy it?
We just heard that, was it Kings of Leon or one of the first
Yeah, the
bands
first band to
to
release
release.
an NFT album.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think they generated a couple $1,000,000 from token sales really, really quick, which is probably a lot more than they would have made with a traditional release for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we had one piece of digital art, and this is interesting. One piece of digital art by a guy who, if I recall correct, I can't remember exactly his name, but I think he goes by the artist name Beepy. Um, Sold for like 69 million US. You know, in cryptocurrency, so it changes value all the time. But you know, tremendous amounts of money and interest being generated in this thing. I still understand only the edges of it and how it works. I haven't yet made the link to how it's going to affect artists in their lives, but there are people who are really, you know, jamming on this full time now, and I think it's going to be another really interesting thing to watch. And look, part of this is coming out of we've all as humanity, we've all been locked down for a year, and we all miss concerts and we all miss shows, and we're in a world where we're increasingly connected to each other by zeros and ones by digital tech. So technology does and should continually evolve to find interesting ways to connect us, and there will always be people out there trying to find ways to extract value from that technology.
Right.
Mhm.
Do you think that the publishing companies, like you mentioned, Mike McCarty and his new company, and all the money that's being paid for the Bob Dylan catalog and all of that sort of acquisitions that are being made, you know, for cash for artists for the rights to their publishing. Do you think that any of this is hinging on the future of NFT, or is that something
No, I
altogether?
think it's a totally different thing. And I can frame that up for you because I've spent a lot of time talking and thinking about this over the last 5 years. So back to, I ran the digital business for Warner Chappell Music Publishing for a couple of years at the beginning of the 2000s, like 2006, 2007. But and we could see some stuff like this start to emerge, but it's way beyond where it was now. In those days, a publisher would take a look at how much money a song had earned in the last year or the last few years, and then extrapolate out to a value 6 to 10 times typically what that song had generated in previous earnings, and that's what they thought a song was worth. Pretty simple equation. The companies like Primary Wave and Hypnosis fundamentally saw something different. And Catchpoint is another one who should be mentioned in the same breath as these guys. These guys look at it and they're like, hey, you know what? No matter what happens in the world, no matter what stupid thing Donald Trump tweets, no matter what happens in the global economy, you can bet that How Can You Mend a Broken Heart will generate this much money every year. And when you look at it that way, without anything else, it becomes disassociative with whatever the economic conditions or political conditions or global environment is. And that means, from a purely cash standpoint, has nothing to do with the song other than that song is a consistent generator of cash. So is an insurance policy, by the way, but insurance policies have risk. If there's a hurricane or huge forest fires in BC, insurance companies have to pay out.
Mhm.
No matter what, if there's a huge fire, for the most part, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart still earning the same amount of money every year. So when you look at music that way, from the standpoint and from the unromantic viewpoint of how much cash it generates, how consistently, you can then look at it not as a publishing asset and a song that you're just buying a cash stream. And if you're looking at it as a cash stream, the rules are very different. And the other thing that the companies that are really successful at this are doing is they are not, you notice that Hypnosis and Primary Wave aren't spending the bulk of their time developing new artists and de-risking. They're taking things where they know exactly to the penny what that song has generated. And then, by the way, they're both really good stewards of it. So they're out there finding new commercials and new sync opportunities that are consistent with how the writer would use their song and getting more money out of them. Because if you think about it, a major traditional publisher, would have millions and millions of titles in their catalog, and the people who are out there pitching business opportunities for the songs probably only have knowledge of a few hundred of them. I mean, in the old days when I worked at Warner Chappell, we had this beautiful box set that we would send out every year of these are the songs that, are the hallmark of Warner Chappell. And we'd give everybody who we thought could commercially use music in a picture or a TV commercial one of those box sets. So we would hope that they would listen to them and then just remember that our song, we had a song for that. Or if they call us saying, I need a song for this, we'd say, go to your CD and listen to disc 8, track number 7. I think that's the song for you. The companies like, the new song rights holders, the new song managers, if you will, like Primary Wave, again, Hypnosis. Those guys represent far fewer songs. They tend to be songs that are really, really well known. And they have somebody assigned to each of them that has a catalog that they're responsible of maybe 500 or 600 songs. But they're out there finding opportunities for every one of those songs. So they bring in more business, and then they pay dividends to their owners and investors. But at the basic part of it, it looks more like an insurance business than it does a music business.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey,
that's not very attractive.
No.
Well, it's not very attractive, and it's not very sexy. But the upside of this is that when somebody like, when an artist who's had a good career isn't able to tour, you'll get somebody like a Primary Wave coming in and offering them 2 or 3 times what a traditional publisher would offer them for the same set of rights. Mm-hmm. And in that, I think it's been really great for the artists who are lucky and fortunate enough to have written something that fits at that point in the world. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that the other part of the business is going away. It's just got back to this idea of a different risk profile from the financial view associated with it. Right. And by the way, that's not a very romantic way to look at music, because at the end of the day, all of this stuff is about finding songs that emotionally connect with people. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the funny thing in music. I mean, it's a business, but it's a business that's driven by conveying and capturing emotions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, by connection still, for sure.
Going viral. Our manager used to say, all we need is to get everybody saying Universal Honey at the same time.
Yeah, but then it would just sound like
right. Well, Jim, I got to tell you that you're an awesome guy. I remember the first time I met Craig Northey. We played a date with them in Red Deer, Alberta, and he was like, he immediately came up to us, and I think it's because of our connection that we'd had with you and that he'd had with you, and it was like we were friends because of that. I met Dan Brick one night at the Rivoli. I was there to see a band, and he came up to me and he was like, I know who you are. I worked with Jim Rondinelli and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, so we really appreciate you giving us your time to come on our show tonight and share all this information that we would have probably shared over a meal somewhere. We often talk about, remember that restaurant we went to where we had that, it was like a vegan dragon bowl, and it was like,
in New York City.
In New York City. Yeah, Jim took us to that restaurant, and it was like,
all the best experiences were with Jim.
Oh, that Mexican restaurant.
You know what I remember? I have pictures of this, and damn, I should have brought these up, but I have pictures of both of you in my rental Miata driving between Banff and Vancouver on that tour too. I remember that really well.
Like that, I still remember that. I can remember how the air smelled when we were driving, and it was getting more and more green. Stop. and it was getting more and more green, and just and your the it was convertible, so the top was down, and it was a little bit of cool air, but you had the heat on, and we would take turns driving with you and getting out of the van,
It
and
was
that
so
was
fun.
just a magical
You played
time.
drums. You played drums on Find Yourself one night. Where was that?
Oh, I love that. That was in Banff.
That was Banff, yeah.
That was in
right.
Banff. I was honored to do that. That was really great.
Yeah.
I just
And then there was
I- yeah.
the place. There was also the place in Austin that you took us to. You took us to a magical. Every time we're with you, we go someplace magical.
Well, yeah,
And
like
then there was a place in Austin where it was like a. Remember the cave had it was like a natural spring or something.
Hamilton Pools. We went to
Hamilton
Hamilton
Pools.
Hamilton
You took,
Pool.
oh my god!
and we took advantage of the open container law in Texas too, right? So
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
open carry.
yeah, Hamilton Pools. And was that the night that we went for dinner with Jody Stevens?
That may very well, and Jody and the Big Star thing. That was a really fun time. I love Jody. Truly, in the words of Karen Glover, the nicest man in rock. That guy,
Yeah.
he's such a huge heart.
And such an
And,
awesome drummer. And you would know that he's an awesome drummer because you're a drummer
Oh my
yourself,
gosh.
right?
No, he was such an influence from the first time. Another producer who I go way back to Iowa days with Brad Jones turned me on to Big Star, and from the first thing I noticed was Jody's just super beautiful musical playing all over those records.
Oh my gosh,
You know,
yeah.
and I feel like I want to pull back to something that we haven't talked about though, and that's, we're going into Juno season. The Hip are getting a lot, arguably the most rewarded band in Canada, but for damn good reason. Those guys are getting, whatever the latest Lifetime Achievement Award is, and I think it's really interesting. First of all, the new Strippers record, Union record, if you haven't heard it, is a really great listen. Totally different from what they've done in the past, and has some really worthy stuff on it. So props to Craig and to Robbie for that. But if you look at what those guys have done and the body of work that those guys created during their career, and how much they have ahead, because I am happy to tell you that I know that they're going to be doing some really extraordinary new releases that we should all be keeping a lookout on. But I just want to say, those guys are real something and a treasure. And the joke is that underneath the 49th parallel, not a lot of people get it. And maybe that's because inherently music was a little different down here than there. Maybe it was because of the border, but maybe it's because there's so many cultural references, whether it's, Bob Cajun or Blow It High Dough or Hugh McClellan or
Paris of the Prairies.
Paris of the Prairies. Exactly. But damn, what an amazing band, and how great to see those guys doing their thing and continuing on after the loss of the great Gord, one of my favorite humans in the world. And also how great to see them back with their manager, Jake Gold, because he was sort of the, I want to say the Brian Epstein, but the extra hip member who was always there. A good thing to see him back in the mix after his sojourns with celebrity television.
Yeah, that's right.
That's true too. Yeah. Well, so
I've always thought that we should do for charity at Jake Gold and Kim Stockwood arm wrestling.
Kim would win, right?
Or a spoken word record between the two of them, which would be great because it would all be shouting. It would be like the world's first closed caption closed caption record. It would just be like that with a punk rock soundtrack. That's my next album.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, have you, now that you've sort of, as you say, pivoted into the industry side of things, you've been working there for a while. Are you doing any projects where you're behind a console or mixing or recording anybody?
Thank you for asking. one of the things about the move to tech was when I made the move to tech, I was pretty burnt out on listening and living inside a 20 by 25-foot room with 4 really great intimate people, but working 6 days a week and 14 hours a day. But at the same point in time, and 4 or 5 years later, I could start to listen to music again and enjoy it without thinking, oh, for Christ's sake, turn the harmonizer off the vocals. You could just kind of listen through it and hear the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I always miss the craft.
Yeah.
Always miss the craft. I love making records. I feel grateful that I've found a different way to support my family these days, because it's been really hard on a lot of the transition's been really, really hard on a lot of great record makers. But it's starting to sort out, and there are opportunities out there again. So, but the funny thing that you asked is on Monday night, I finished, and the irony of this is I finished mixing an album for a dear friend who's a producer that I wasn't expecting to get work on. And it is probably, and I can't talk about it because the release date isn't set and the distributor isn't set, but I can tell you that it's probably the biggest artist of my career, and it's with an artist that I've been a huge fan of for 35 years.
Okay, I think I know who it is, but I'm not
super, super, super stoked, but I cannot, unfortunately, discuss who it's with. But in the archive version of this, I hope to, as that record comes out, I'll hope to be able to tag it onto the stuff here on the archive version of this recording.
Cool. Awesome.
Well, I look forward to everybody knowing who that is and what it is. And I think that we would love to make a record with you from the ground up one day. So let's put that on the bucket list.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
Yes. Absolutely.
Figure out a way to make that happen.
Yeah.
But this has been
Me
awesome.
too.
This has been like the best conversation.
I know.
I always love talking to you. I always love seeing you. I can't wait till I can give you a hug and we can go for a meal.
Yes.
And see Tony and the kids.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Oh
you guys as well. And I do want to say though that I know COVID's been hard, but geez, that liquor cabinet looks pretty serious behind you. It's like, and here's my liquor.
Yeah.
I know. I told him we should not have it there, but he was like, no, we have to have it.
It is rock and roll.
We're not drinking enough. If we drank all that,
it's staying there every shot. No, I have such great memories of you guys. I can't wait till we actually get to record something from scratch. That's going to be a hoot. We will make that happen. And again, please everybody go out and listen to UH 2020 because that is just it's a record that has so many freaking great songs on it. I just love it.
Oh,
wow,
that means a ton to us.
That means a lot to us, actually.
Thank you so much.
You, Jim.
Well, as I like to say that, and $2.75 will buy you a token for the subway. So there you go.
So you're currently in the Seattle area, and you're close to skiing. I know that you've been skiing a little bit lately, and that's something you guys love to do.
Good for the soul. That's been good. Skiing and mixing. So the one thing I can talk to you about is that I'm working on a different mixing platform now. So the company I work for, Immersion Networks, has invented a totally different way to mix music. And you can look on our website at immersion.net and see a vague picture of it. But basically, we now have the ability to mix music that doesn't just come out of your speakers, but it sounds like things. First of all, it works perfectly in headphones. And when you have your headphones on, I can make things sound like they're in front of you, behind you, going around you, going above you, going below you, going inside your head, going off the wall. I can really create almost the same kind of audio experience that, say, a computer graphics artist could do when they're making scenes for a movie like Jurassic Park, but in the sense of sound. So when people make movies today, the performance of the artist is often fragmented or disassociated with the place that they actually are presenting that in. So it might be the artist over a green screen, and then all of a sudden they're on a cityscape or they're in a jungle or something like that, and all that stuff is done in post-processing. In a lot of ways, this is sort of the audio equivalent of that, except the net thing is that it has a totally different feel to it. And if you keep an eye on our website, immersion.net, over the next few weeks, you'll have a chance to hear exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm really excited for people to hear that. And that's something that I think is going to really change the world and the way we listen to and mix music.
Okay, wait a second, because when we went to Woodstock to work with Todd, he had this glass head that had microphones in the ears.
Yes, it's a binaural head, and often they were named Fritz. But that is a recording technology that's been out there for a while, and it's interesting. But the problem with it is, and I'm going to take it to a next level. If you listen to the first Beck record, Carl, who worked on that, did a lot of that kind of recording as well. But that technique falls down and is no longer apparent when you start doing the stuff that everybody does in music services today to deliver the audio. So we've come up with a very different approach. Our chief scientist is the guy who invented most of the digital audio techniques that are used to deliver music today in streaming services. But the core math for that was done like 30 years ago. And if you think about the difference in computing power now, my handy iPhone here has the computing power of a room of supercomputers from that era. And there are so many more things we can do with cloud computing now, where we link a bunch of server computers together to throw them on a task for a microsecond and then let them go about their business and do something else. We're leveraging that technology now to create an audio experience. It's very, very, very different. And for me, it's been a thing of love because it gives me a chance not only to work on these great records and feel like I've got part of my soul back after the last 20-something years of working in technology, but just to be able to hear how different things feel. Because, the three of us have had an experience that music fans don't have. The three of us have been able to listen to a take in the control room, or we've been there playing with the band in the space, and we know exactly how that sounds and feels. But then as it goes down the process of, mixing and overdubs, and then it gets manufactured, and then it gets shipped out, and then my dogs are fighting through the door here. It gets shipped out, and it goes to a streaming service, and there's something that gets taken away as it gets farther and farther from the recording. We've come up with a way to actually restore that and to put you back into the space that thing and give you most importantly, the emotional feeling of what was happening when that was done. And we're super stoked about that. I cannot wait for people to hear it. Again, it'll be online at www.immersion.net.
That sounds awesome.
That's so cool. And by the way, when you said it was your dogs fighting in the doorway, I thought it was Ian, our producer, breathing into the microphone. So it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
It's okay. So
I've been known to get Ian flustered in the past.
Yeah. Jim, I hate to say goodbye.
I know.
Or long
we'll
until
see
the next
later.
time.
Let's
see you later.
See you soon. Let's
say that because the border's going to
Agreed.
open, and you're a lot closer now. I think you're a lot closer now than we've ever been as far as where we were physically location.
Well, probably we haven't been this close since I was living in New York and you guys were living in TO. That was probably the last time we were this close. But then it was San Diego to TO, and then which didn't work, and then San Diego to Saskatoon. Then that's a little bit better, but then now Seattle to Saskatchewan. Sign me up. I can't wait for everybody to get healthy and things to get better and the border to open back up and things to start flowing again. And I really look forward to seeing you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jim. It's just
we could talk all night. You know that.
We could. Oh my God, and we will.
We may have to.
We may have to. But anyways, we'll be in touch soon, I guess, off the air here. And
we love you,
Thank
Jim.
you so much. We love
forward
you.
to it. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay.
Thank you so much. Wow.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I could talk to Jim forever.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
He's just got so much insight, so much good information.
He's just such a. You just feel his heart and soul and everything.
He's got a good vocabulary too.
He does.
And he knows how to use it, which is.
So we better do the show wrap now. It's been quite a while. We've gone for a while here.
It's gone for a while.
Yeah,
it's hard not to talk about stuff. Though,
I
right?
know. Well, of course, it's hard. So what's going around around town again?
Again, we ask if anyone cares to tell people who work in the clubs or know anyone that's got an event coming up to let us know, and we'll certainly pitch it on air here. It's once a week, every Wednesday, 7:00 on No YXE, the virtual TV channel.
We want to thank Jim Rondinelli for coming on the show tonight,
and Ian and Deborah.
Yeah, and Ian and Deborah. And
our sponsor, Field Fox.
Field Fox Gardens and Cookery. Order that lasagna at fieldfox.ca. Give yourself a break and have some amazing food. So please subscribe and follow No YXE on YouTube and Facebook. The Green Room also has t-shirts, so be sure to check that out. And just we're going to promote some other No YXE shows. Be sure to tune in to YXE Sports Podcast Mondays at 6:00 and find out everything sports. And Let's Chat is on Tuesday at 11 a.m. And that's Let's Chat Tuesday at 11 a.m. In Focus YXE is Thursdays at 7 p.m. That's a fun game show. And Slow TV, I don't know if that's still on. Slow TV YXE Sunday at 10 a.m. And if you're an artist and you have something coming up, be sure to email us at the Green Room YXE at noyxe.com and we'll get you on here. So that's it for this Wednesday. Have a great week. We'll see you next Wednesday at 7. We're going to have some artists from
Saskatchewan, because the Saskatchewan Country Music Association is having their awards.
Yes.
So we're going to
sort of fun.
Focus on that.
Yeah. Awesome. So you guys have a great week and keep rocking and rolling.
Peace out.